the Thanksgiving feast. Trigger warning. This story contains graphic horror, suspenseful elements, and disturbing themes related to familial tension, supernatural violence, and psychological terror. Please proceed with caution if these themes may be unsettling. The drive back to Willow Creek was long, and the sky seemed darker than usual. Jenna glanced over at her husband, Sam, who was hunched over the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the twisting road. They hadn't been back for Thanksgiving in years, not since her mother's death, and the air between them felt thick with unspoken apprehension. The invitation from her father, though brief, was laden with an urgency she couldn't ignore. When they finally reached the old family farmhouse, nestled deep in the woods on the outskirts of town, it looked as imposing as Jenna remembered. She shivered, recalling childhood fears that the house itself was alive, watching, waiting. The windows, clouded with dust, stared back at her as if in confirmation. "Here we are," Sam said, forcing a smile as he killed the engine. "It's just one dinner. We'll be out of here by tomorrow morning." Jenna nodded, not quite believing him. It felt like once they stepped through the door, the house would close in around them, trapping them in its secrets. As they stepped inside, her father greeted them with a faint, unsettling smile. His face was leaner, his eyes darker and sunken. He was almost a stranger to her now, a man whittled down to bones and shadows. "Jenna," he said, his voice low and scratchy. "Sam, so good of you to come." The house had the stifling smell of decay, masked by a faint aroma of sage and something sweet, almost sickly. Her father led them down the hall toward the dining room, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Sam squeezed her hand, sensing her unease. Inside, the dining table was set for a grand feast. Plates and cutlery, polished to a blinding shine, waited beside a sprawling array of dishes. The turkey sat in the center, skin glazed to a deep golden brown, surrounded by sides of all varieties: stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, yams, and dishes she didn't even recognize. "Quite the spread, isn't it?" her father said with a strange pride. He gestured for them to sit, though the table looked too large for the three of them, as if expecting more guests. The last chair, Jenna noticed, had a peculiar shadow, a darkness that seemed to shift when she looked at it directly. She brushed it off as an illusion, a trick of the dim light. They ate in silence for several minutes, her father watching as Jenna and Sam filled their plates. The food was rich, almost too much, every bite laden with strange, heavy flavors. Jenna tried to ignore the odd aftertaste that lingered in her mouth. "So, Dat," she ventured, clearing her throat, "why did you want us to come back this year? It's been a while." He stared at her, a strange glint in his eyes. "Family is important, Jenna, especially now." He paused, looking down at his plate. "I have something to share, something important. I hoped you'd understand." Before Jenna could question him, a loud creak echoed from the hallway. Both she and Sam turned to look, but her father remained still, his eyes fixed on his plate, as though the sound was expected. The silence that followed was oppressive, thickening the air around them. Jenna shifted uncomfortably. The creak came again, this time closer. Her father cleared his throat, his voice calm. "It's time to give thanks." He closed his eyes, bowing his head, and they followed suit, more out of habit than reverence. But as Jenna closed her eyes, she felt a prickling sensation, as though something, or someone, was watching her. "Thank you for this feast," her father began, his voice low, almost chanting. "Thank you for the gathering of kin and for the bonds that bind us in life and in death." Jenna's eyes snapped open. Her father's face was upturned, his lips moving rapidly in a language she didn't recognize. The air in the room grew colder, and the light above them flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. A cold hand clasped her shoulder, and she gasped, jerking away from the empty space. Sam reached out, grabbing her arm. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, it's just..." She trailed off, unable to explain the feeling of dread washing over her. Her father's voice grew louder, his tone sharp and forceful. Jenna could feel a presence in the room, thick and malevolent, as if something unseen had joined them at the table. She glanced at the empty chair again, now convinced that the darkness surrounding it was not just a trick of the light. And then she saw it, a faint, shimmering outline of a figure sitting in the chair, a face twisted in a silent scream. "Dad," Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. "What? What is that?" He ignored her, continuing his chant, his eyes wild and feverish. The figure grew more distinct, its features sharpening with each of her father's words, a woman with hollow eyes and pale, lifeless skin. It was her mother. Jenna stumbled back, knocking over her chair. Sam was at her side in an instant, his face pale. "We need to leave," he whispered urgently. But her father's voice rose, felling the room, an incantation that vibrated through the walls. The figure of her mother turned to Jenna, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, her eyes locked onto Jenna's, empty and haunting. Jenna felt rooted to the spot, her body frozen in horror. "You don't understand," her father said, his voice barely human. "We are bound by blood. The family must stay together." The lights flickered again, and when they came back, more figures had appeared around the table. Ghostly, translucent bodies in various states of decay, ancestors from generations past, faces she vaguely recognized from family photos. They stared at her with cold, hollow eyes, their mouths moving in silent, ghastly words. Jenna and Sam staggered backward as the spirits rose from their chairs, their forms drifting toward her, arms outstretched. "Dad, what did you do?" Jenna choked out, her voice barely audible. "It's tradition, Jenna," he replied with a hollow smile. "To keep the family whole, the living must give thanks to the dead and join them." He advanced, his eyes dark and lifeless. She could see now that he wasn't the man she remembered, but a husk, possessed by whatever dark ritual he had summoned. "Run!" Sam yelled, yanking her arm. They sprinted toward the door, but the shadows closed in around them, stretching like claws, reaching for them. The figures wailed, a low, mournful sound that seemed to shake the walls. Jenna stumbled, feeling icy fingers brush against her skin, pulling her back. Sam grabbed her, lifting her to her feet, and they reached the door, only to find it locked. "Dad, please!" Jenna screamed, pounding on the wood. "Let us go!" Her father stood in the hallway, his face twisted in anger. "You can't leave, Jenna. This is your home. You are bound here, like all of us." He raised his hands, and the spirits surged forward, their faces contorted with rage and hunger. Sam threw his weight against the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Jenna," he gasped, his voice breaking. I don't think we're getting out." "No," she whispered, her heart pounding. "This can't be happening." The spirits were upon them, their hands cold and clammy, gripping her arms, her shoulders, pulling her down. She struggled, but the strength was leaving her body, sapped by the icy touch of the dead. The world blurred, and she felt herself sinking into darkness, the voices of her ancestors chanting in her ears. And then, silence. Jenna awoke in the dining room, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows around her. She was seated at the head of the table, her father across from her, smiling. "Welcome back," he said softly. "Dinner is served." She looked down, her hands pale and cold, translucent. Sam sat beside her, his face expressionless, his eyes vacant. Around them, the family gathered, bound together in an eternal feast. Her father raised a glass. "To family," he whispered, his voice echoing in the empty room. And as the candlelight dimmed, Jenna understood with chilling certainty. She would never leave. She was bound to this place, her soul woven into the fabric of her family's curse, destined to sit at this table for all eternity. If this tale of dark family traditions and spectral horrors left you unsettled, share it with friends and family who love a good horror story, and consider leaving a review or a comment with your thoughts. And remember, sometimes family gatherings are best kept in the present, lest the past come creeping in to take its place.